Are we not turning this in?
Yes. Oh no, that's for Caleb.
Oh,
That's
turning
Caleb's. Yeah, Caleb's. Okay, soon starts. Who would like to go first? A volunteer and then Charlemagne. Rock, paper, scissors. Who's your team captain? Pick a person.
Rock, paper, scissors. Okay.
The best 2 out of 3.
Wait. Just rock, paper, scissors. No shoot, right?
No shoot.
No shoot. Rock, paper, scissors.
What was that?
Paper, rock, paper, scissors. Okay. You got it first then. He just changed. He's like, oh, wait, go stand up. Yeah, we're first. Oh, you're just changing it. You want the lights on? Or you want the different on?
Let's have the lights on because it was a little too dark last time.
I don't like the question.
What?
See, Alice would hate to me.
Good thing her name's not in
Are we ready? Okay, the way this is going to work with your timing is that I'm going to tell you to stop, okay? So about 3 to 4 minutes, and then at that time, at 4 minutes, then I'm going to say, please wrap up, okay? I need your outlines, remember? Outlines.
It's not a problem, we're emailing it to you. It's always pretty warm in this building.
That's better than the anthropology building, like the old
Do you guys
ones.
Kimberly?
Can the other team start? Is that all right? If the Anglo-Saxons go first?
Sure. Okay. All right, the Saxons, why don't you guys go first?
You go first?
Yeah, that's fine. You're up by your PowerPoint.
Well, you really don't need to. Just
It's minimized on the window.
Do you want to try another computer?
This one?
Yes.
I don't know why. I have my laptop. I would draw my hand. How do I play it?
Yeah. Yes, because they couldn't find their PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. They're going to go first. Okay, so go ahead. Shh. Everyone, shh.
So hello everyone. You guys. All right. Before my group begins their speeches, I'm first gonna define morality, since it's really important involving our topic, and I'm be touching on a few points involving Charlemagne and the Anglo-Saxons. So there are different ways to look at morality, and there is the way that morality is defined as good and bad behavior based off principles, which is why Charlemagne massacred thousands of Saxons. In other words, he killed thousands of Saxons because they didn't believe what he believed. Then, from the Oxford Dictionary, you can look at morality as the extent to which an action is right or wrong. This definition to me and our group makes more sense because what Charlemagne did was kill and take the lives of innocent men, women, and even children because of what he wanted them to believe. Although morality is something really complex, I'm sure we can all agree that killing innocent people is extremely immoral, especially killing someone for no good reason, unless you consider trying to convert someone a good reason. On the other hand, the Anglo-Saxons at this time weren't really doing anything to deserve such punishment. The Anglo-Saxons were just people that stayed true to themselves and stood up to what they believed in. So were the Anglo-Saxons wrong? No, they definitely were not. They were actually the victims, and their lives were ruined by one man, which is obviously Charlemagne. Today, from what it seems, we have grown from such evil, and it's not because we know now what's right from wrong, but because in today's society, there are strict rules that prevent that. Therefore, I am sure Charlemagne knew morally exactly what he did when he killed all those people. Even by Charlemagne's heinous actions, it's clear to see that he didn't even leave any sort of legacy by killing all these people. He only left to know what is now called in the history books as the Massacre of Verdun. In conclusion, our further speech topics are going to involve religion, political structure, and the resistance to the franchise empire. And before I leave, I want you guys to keep calm and be moral. Thank you.
Hello. Carry on, I'm sorry. Hello. Today I will be talking about religion and the tension it caused. So, first, in order to understand how and why religion brought a lot of tension between the Anglo-Saxons and Charlemagne, we must understand what religions were involved. The Anglo-Saxons were pagans. Paganism is a polytheistic religion. So they had many gods, but mainly focused their religion around one main god, Woden, who is the god of poets, seers, as well as a healer. Since he is a healer, he is also known as the god of the magicians. Sacrifices of inanimate objects were made to gods in paganism. The dead were usually cremated with other objects belonging to the deceased individual, and kings claimed their direct ancestors were gods. Their claims influenced laws and codes of their time. So, their entire society was based off of paganism itself. Anglo-Saxon paganism was superstitious religion, with love charms, phrases, potions, and jewels, all for good luck. Christianity is very different, and in fact, discourages many pagan rituals and beliefs. Christianity more centers itself around prayers, and individuals intercede between them and God. Christians do not sacrifice inanimate objects, and during the 5th century they believed the dead was to be buried only. They only worship one God. Their God was never on earth, so no leader could be in a direct line of children, as where pagans, the kings believed that they were, their ancestors were directly the gods. Christianity during this time was to be spread quickly, and Charlemagne was reinforcing that Christianity so that it would be the only religion standing. Basically, the only similarity between Christians and pagans is that all code and laws of the nation that claims that religion base their laws off of most aspects of their religion. Charlemagne and Christians saw paganism as devil worship. The Anglo-Saxons saw, to save their beliefs, what made them who they were are. who they were, often tricked Charlemagne by saying that they would convert while he was occupied with trying to better himself to strike. They would tell Charlemagne that they were going to convert to Christianity, and then while Charlemagne was going to try and better himself, that's when the Saxons would strike. This was their only defense to save all they ever knew. Although Charlemagne was not the only one who wanted to convert the Anglo-Saxons from paganism to Christianity, he was the most influential. He sent armies to convert by force, and so tension built up. After all, would you just want to give up all you had and rebuild your life?
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, start my speech. I'd like for you all to put yourself in the seat of an Anglo-Saxon at this time, during the massacre of Verdun. Imagine the cold steel of a blade on your neck. The last thing you see is the sword of tyranny slicing your firstborn son and your wife. Everything you held dear is now gone. Everything you centered your life around is now gone because of one man, Charles the Great. What's so great about this immoral ruler, emperor of Europe? Yeah, maybe he unified Europe, but was it morally done right? The answer to that is no. As Italian historian Alessandro Barbero, regarding Charlemagne and this massacre, puts it, produced perhaps the greatest stain on his reputation. I hope that we could all agree here today, don't want to leave you guys out, that killing innocent children and women in the name of Christianity is wrong. Not only to include that, Charlemagne he claimed that he was a Christian, but this was not in his life whatsoever. Having multiple wives and concubines and slaying those who did not agree with him, to me that's not Christianity, and I believe many who follow the Christian faith would agree with that. Not only that, but this army that Charlemagne had was not even his own doing. As Fordham University puts it, Charlemagne was left a strong army from his dad and grandfather. He cannot therefore be called a distinguished general. So not only did this coward not even be able to make his own army, but he slaughtered innocent women and children, and then with this huge army built up by his father and grandfather. So I ask you and leave you here today with, can we really say that Charlemagne morally unified Europe? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the political structure of Charlemagne and the Saxons. So to start out with, we're going to start with the social order of the Saxons. So they had kings, okay? Below the kings were the thanes, who owned land and had influence over what the king said and did. Below them were the churls, and those were the freemen. And then finally at the bottom were the slaves, but they were not going to always be slaves. They were only paying off their debts, which is different than we view slaves today. Okay, so the government of the Saxons had a council, not only a king, but a council that advised the king. And thanes and bishops were on this council. The council was called the Witan, or Witanagerment, and they advised the king. They kept him from abusing his power, and they could elect a new king if they didn't agree with how this king was ruling. So pretty much they had like one of the first systems of checks and balances that we see in our world today. Not only one person had total, complete power, which was different from Charlemagne, who was just a king. He had all the power to himself and was later declared the emperor of Rome. So now I'm going to talk about Charlemagne. Before he was emperor, he just had a monarchy. He just had him and his brother ruling. But his brother mysteriously died, which gave sole power to Charlemagne. So he was just a king, had no checks and balances, like I said before. The Saxons obviously had more spread of power. Finally, on December 25th, 800, the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor. The Pope gave him this power because Charlemagne went out and fought, sent his army out to fight and spread Christianity forcefully and violently, which I think we can all agree is not moral. And pretty much it was like he bought his way into the Pope, to the emperorship, because he did something for the Pope, who then in turn crowned him emperor. And so he spent most of his reign in war, which most people do not like war. And so we can say that war was not moral, whereas the Saxons were just trying to defend themselves and their beliefs. They didn't go out to start the war.
All right.
Okay, so the Saxons definitely had their downfalls. Everyone in my group, we've given pros on the Saxons and some peaceful things that they've done. However, they did have a reputation for being ruthless. And so whenever you look at these things, I'm sure you guys are going to bring stuff up about that, but whenever we look at it in retrospect to the debate, which is on unification in Europe, we can see that the Saxons were actually more peaceful and more moralistic about the way that they went about unifying. And so Charlemagne was a medieval empire who ruled most of Europe. He eventually became king of the Franks, which is, if you look here on the top left, it was located in present-day Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Western Germany. However, one of Charlemagne's main goals was to ensure the survival of Christianity in Europe. Whenever Charlemagne was being raised, he was brought up as a military strategist. And so he spent most of his reign engaged in warfare to accomplish the goals, which would be to ensure Christianity. And this kind of has to do with where he met the Saxon people, which you can see here on the other side, the top right, the Saxon Empire versus the Frankish. And so this sort of unification based on religion was where he got his warfare, which is where we were talking about the massacre of the Saxon people. Charlemagne's main goal was to unify Europe. However, he acted on force and his own personal interests. And these were not really a natural means of expansion. And so whenever you look at the cultural genocide that Charlemagne basically committed by slaughtering many of the Saxon people and eventually absorbing them into his empire, it's not exactly a moralistic viewpoint as we gave floor for in the beginning of the debate. I actually have a quote here from an article released by Encyclopedia Britannica, and it says, quote, Charlemagne served as a source of inspiration for leaders such as Napoleon Bonaparte as well as Adolf Hitler, who also had visions of a unified Europe. I thought this was interesting because, as you know, this was a cultural genocide based on unification. However, the Saxons were a little bit different whenever you compare the unification in Europe. Because the Saxons were an entire culture where Charlemagne is just one man, you can see that the spread of a culture is much more natural and much more peaceful than the conquering of an empire. And so while many of the Saxons may have had a bad reputation for being ruthless, as I've said before, there were always exceptions to that rule. And by that I mean just because the Saxons as a culture had a reputation, that doesn't mean that everyone was. There were still innocent men, women, and children who were slaughtered during the absorption of them into the Frankish Empire. However, the Saxons still had a unification effect on Europe. Whenever you look through, the spread of Saxon culture through Europe was much more natural, and you can see that they created a steady of expansion through, quote, less than an organized conquest through a large sequence of migrations, families, and clans. And so through all of this was how their unification was more moralistic.
All right, thank you.
The subject I would like to bring up today is one of self-determination. It is a very European tradition, especially if you ever studied the First World War, really everything since the fall of the Roman Empire, that nations desire their own identity. They desire their own identity for two reasons. One, so they can have their own culture, unoppressed by others, and two, so they can decide their own laws and how they want to live their lives. The problem with any empire, and I wish to bring Charlemagne's into this, is that if you conquer these areas, you wish to bring them into your own image. We have already discussed today how Charlemagne's empire attempted to impose Christianity and other beliefs on other nations. Now, if you believe this to be moral, this is completely destroying the entire ideas of self-determination, a concept that the nations of Europe have fought for over 1,500 years. Every single nation you can see currently on a map has fought through things like this. We even mentioned Luxembourg, a little country on that map that you cannot even see, because it will spend the next 1,000 years fighting for its self-identity. Saxons are no different than this. The Saxons are a major part of Europe that will eventually become a major portion of the German Empire later on. And so, if Charlemagne is to be considered moral, we would have to consider that destroying the image of the Saxons to also be a moral thing. Now, I wish to go to the next picture. Now, one thing I would like to point out for Charlemagne's legacy is here on this map, I'm sorry it's in German by the way, we have Europe about 1000. And if you can speak German, it says Sachsen right there. I know I pronounced it horribly, I apologize. That means Saxony in German. One thing I would like to really point out here is that even though Charlemagne conquered a wonderful empire, within 200 years it has fallen, and here is Saxony once more. So even though Charlemagne might even be a great military genius who could conquer Europe, he failed at successfully doing so, or even bringing many of these lands under France. France at this point is actually even smaller than it is currently. He couldn't even hold on to the lands that modern France was able to, nor could his ancestors. So if you wish to look at Charlemagne as a great leader, a great political leader, you must look at the fact that his military might fail to have any lasting effect, and currently we are doing better than he could. And actually, to close off some of this, I wish to say a poem I early rewrote. I wish to give the title to Goodnight here. He came up with this wonderful title, The Stain on Charlemagne. Imagine rivers running red, dead children in the streets, the bloody stain of Charlemagne across all Germany. Imagine brutes of mindless strength who steal your life and limb. Invading Franks for treasure banks will kill you in your sleep. Imagine endless war for years, defending your homeland. Is it right to kill at night and burn your cities down? Imagine kings who kill for wealth, including their own kin. This all's the game of Charlemagne. The Saxons fought for life. Thank you.
I just want to point out that he just wrote that poem. We didn't know he was going to do that.
Wow. Okay, Charlemagne, you're up now.
Okay, well, I got my own message for the day.
Almost.
Did you get mine?
The doctors are confused. So it's going to go politics, religion, military. That's what, yeah. Politics, military, religion.
Okay. Did you send me yours? No, I didn't even realize that.
It only has an
It's the, you had it right, it's the circle one on the front.
Don't forget your outlines, guys, okay? A week from today for your evaluation papers, Charlemagne.
No, he did.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did that help you?
No,
Oh.
I forgot to look at it. I was looking down. Oh. I'll do that next time. Oh, but next time I have a class.
You should
So, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I really apologize for that. So we have the famous Charlemagne.
Ready? Alright, good morning everyone. Hope everyone here is having a great day. My fellow teammates and I are here just to remind everyone why Charlemagne was an all-around great man. In this debate, we'll be focusing mostly on political, military, and religion. I'm going to start our presentation by introducing Charlemagne, also known as Charles I and Charles the Great. And I'm going to just give a little bit of background information of what he did over his impressive life. So Charlemagne was born around April 2nd, 742 AD. No one's really sure on the exact date that he was born. It's between 740 and 750. And he died January 28th in 814 AD. As the other group mentioned earlier, he was born in Francia, which is modern-day France, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg. His dad was Pippin III. He was the mayor of the palace which they lived in, and he was appointed by the king. So, in his younger years, Charlemagne received practical training for his leadership by participating in political, social, and military activities associated with his father's work. So as a young boy, he was already getting all this experience. So of course, this set him up for success as a leader. In 771, Charlemagne became king of the Franks, a Germanic tribe located in present-day Belgium, France, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. His main goal was to unite all the Germanic peoples and convert them into Christianity. Since he was a great military strategist, he was able to accomplish many of his goals, which then led to Pope Leo III crowning Charlemagne the Emperor of Rome, since he was the main defender of Christianity at the time. Now, for the Pope to crown you Emperor of Rome, you must have to be a really awesome person. Charlemagne had three major roles as a leader. He was in control of the army, he defended the church, and he was the supreme judge. So part of his military aspect, he conquered the Lombards in present-day northern Italy, the Avars in modern-day Austria and Hungary, and Bavaria. The area that he ruled was known as the Carolingian Empire, as most of us know, and he ruled for over 4 decades. So that's a long time for one person to rule, especially since when his times people did not live that long. So to rule for over 40 years is pretty good. And what he wanted to do was revive the imperial tradition of the Western Roman Empire. He kind of wanted to bring that back by uniting, by trying to convert everyone into Christianity. And the reason why he wanted to convert everyone to Christianity is because he wanted, like most Christians, to be saved. He wanted to save all these people. And so throughout the rest of our presentation, we're going to talk about how he was able to do this, and we're going to start off with the politics.
So I'm going to talk about the beginning of Charlemagne. So by the 6th century, Western Germanic Franks had turned Christian, and Francia, ruled by
Merovingians was the most powerful kingdom that was successful in the Western Roman Empire. Okay. In 687, Pippin of Herstal, mayor of Palace of Austrasia, ended conflict between various kings and their mayors with his victory at Tertry and became sole governor of the entire Frankish kingdom, as the map was shown with the Saxons. Pippin of Herstal was in time turned over successfully by his son Charles, soon known as Charles Martel, Charles the Great. So that was just the beginning. But in 768, he became king, but he wouldn't really allow the label of king. And and his father was Pippin of Herstal. He was therefore known father of Europe and united most of Western Europe for the first time since the old Roman Empire. And he's best known for his, as Adrian stated, he's best known for his war campaigns, most famous of those which was against the Saxon Avars. And yes, Adrian stated that Charles, much like his predecessors before him, had 3 roles as a ruler. This is what he's most famous for. So he controlled the army, he defended the church, and was supreme judge. His rule spread the Carolingian Renaissance period of cultural and intellectual activity within the Catholic Church. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Okay.
Okay, so, a world at war. In a time that used to be known as the Dark Ages, Karl der Grosse, how I like to call him with my German descent, otherwise known as Charlemagne, inherited a kingdom within a world, a kingdom that was besieged on all sides by enemies. To the south, they were being attacked by the Moors and the Muslims. And also the Lombards in northern Italy attacking Rome. To the southeast, they were fighting the Avars, and of course to the northeast, they were fighting the Saxons. All of these people would like to see Christianity die. Fortunately, Karl der Grosse inherited a great military from his fathers and his grandfather. Next slide, please. So, Karl's heritage comes from the Merovingian times. He was the grandfather of Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, who was the mayor of the house during the Merovingian times. The Merovingian army gave Charlemagne weapons such as the Francesca, which would later give France its name, the Frankish throwing axe, as well as the Frankish sword, which was actually so powerful and apparently good at the time that the Franks would actually have arms limitations so how today people can't buy military weapons that are fully automatic in that kind of level. The Franks had trade embargoes on Frankish swords, and if they caught you trying to trade swords to, say, the Saxons, you would get your head cut off. For a good reason too, because the Saxons were constantly going to war with the Franks. After Charles Martel came Pepin the Short, whose name I love, and he continued to fight the enemies on Frankish territories until he died, leaving the kingdom to Karl and his brother Charlemagne. Great names. Next slide, please. So, Karl der Grosse inherited the kingdom of the Franks with his brother, and they split it halfway. Now, a couple of years into their reign, Charlemagne died of mysterious causes, and while some people might say that it was just natural causes, it might have been Charlemagne. However, this was necessary in order for the Franks to survive. Again, they were being besieged. They were constantly at war, and during this time, whether or not you wanted to be moral or good or not kill, unfortunately, you were being raised in a time where every man
every peasant was a soldier at arms. And so the Franks needed to fight. So next slide. The Franks, Karl der Grosse spent 40 years as king of the Franks before he was crowned emperor of Rome. And in that time, he would constantly be at war with people on his borders. The main enemy of the Franks were the Saxons. And while the Saxons technically were peaceful, they inherited the traditions of their ancient ancestors, the Suebi. They were a warlike people. They liked to raid their neighbors, steal their treasure, steal their women, kill their men. And in order to keep their tribes safe, they would keep dead zones around their cities, hundreds of miles. No man who was not part of the tribe, man, woman, or child who was not part of the tribe, could enter that dead zone without being killed, and that was to maintain peace. So, in my humble opinion, Karl der Grosse, even if he was a bad man, even if he killed thousands and thousands of people, he was doing it for a moral reason, to protect his people and keep Christianity alive.
Okay, is it just me, or is it really nice being up here without the fear of having people ask you questions? Okay, so the real question here, for either side, the Saxons or Charlemagne, is what is morality? Is it, as they put it, what everybody thinks, what everybody believes, and what everybody believes is right or wrong? Or is morality something that's within yourself? Because I know that every single person on your team has a moral standard that I don't have. I guarantee it. And everybody, it's like that for everybody. So, what I'm gonna start with is saying that, like, Charlemagne was a very moral person. Everything he did was for the sole purpose of keeping his religion and spreading his religion to other people. This was the only reason he did that, and he dedicated his whole life, his whole reign to his church. Next slide. Okay, so Charlemagne's love for the church. He loved the church, he gave money to the church. He dedicated his whole life to the church, and everything he did was for it, as I said. But one thing, I'm not the most credible source in the world. I mean, I've taken one history class, a freshman in college. Sorry, you said to sell yourself, but honestly, no. But I do have two sources that both believe Charlemagne was a great person. One is a man named Edward Sullivan. Before he retired, he was a professor at Michigan State University. He wrote 2 books. One was about Charlemagne, and the other was about the Holy Roman Empire. He's a very credible source, and everything in the slide I had, I don't know where it went, but I highlighted many main points that he had, each of which told everybody how he dedicated his time, his money to the church, how he gave his whole life to the church, and how everything he did was morally correct in his eyes. The next source I have is a man named Edmund. He was a servant to Charlemagne. And as your side put it, morality is what everyone believes. Well, people around Charlemagne believed that what he was doing was righteous and correct and morally right. So, whatever definition of morality you use, he was correct. I mean, I guarantee you that Abraham Lincoln, many people thought what he was doing was morally incorrect, but what he did was still morally right. So to sum up, I'm just going to say Charlemagne was a great person, and people around him believed, even people still today believe that he was a great person. In the religious aspects, everything he did was for Christianity. He dedicated his whole life to recreating the Holy Roman Empire, pretty much. And what he believed was true, in his mind, was very morally right. So the argument about whether what he was doing is moral is in the eye of the beholder, and what he believed it was morally right, and so did the people around him.
Very good. Okay.
No, I don't need it. It's okay. This is Charlemagne. This is the man who brought us here today. Today we've heard many arguments from the Anglo-Saxons about how their people were slaughtered and how they were mistreated by the man who was deemed by the Pope the only fit ruler of the Western world. And we've shown today that Charlemagne had very great impacts on military history, on religious history of the West, and had a great political history. He was a political figure, a great man. His stature was said to be of 6'4". He was a leader, the one true leader that we could respect to. Today we ask, was he moral in his unification of Europe? And the question is answered yes. He was moral in his unification of Europe because the Saxons, frankly, were pretty awful people. And to clear up, I'm going to explain how the Saxons were awful and why Charlemagne was right, as by my other teammates have proved, and why you should vote for us in the fact that Charlemagne unified us morally and through a correct power. The Saxons, as we're brought up, were a cruel people, were rapers and pillagers themselves. There was a tale written of the two dragons, the white dragon versus the red dragon, as was a famous story told around the ages. And the white dragon was Charlemagne, and the red dragons were the Anglo-Saxons, the bloodthirsty, and they were a tribish clan filled with pagan beliefs. And and so Charlemagne, with a high moral respect, with a high moral ground by his belief in the church and by the church's belief in Charlemagne, backed by the church and backed by the political leaders of that time, came in, took over, and therefore unified Europe, creating a new space which Europe today is the place of enlightenment. We look to Europe for the ideas, and this couldn't have been done without the Western influence of Charlemagne's beliefs of taking what our great Western ideals are rooted in Christianity and imposing them upon other people against their will. And with that, we look to our greatest leader with his globe and his money, and we say, thank you, Charlemagne. And that is how we will end today. Thank you.
Okay, so at this point in time, what I'd like to do is those of you who aren't in the debates, okay, so I want you to vote. I want you to vote. Now, it'll be a part of my decision, okay, so that'll be one of the criteria. So don't worry, great, if you lose this vote doesn't mean you lose the debate. Makes sense? It's just one criteria. So go ahead and take out a sheet of paper and either write AS or C. AS or C, depending on who you thought.
I emailed it to my son.
Okay, so take out a piece of paper. You do not get to vote.
There's nothing there. I look at my sent emails.
Yeah, we are AS.
I just want you guys all to know.
AS or C.
I do this.
So C?